Welcome to Amplify Your Mindset with Ricky Kalmon. Motivational speaker, mindset expert, and celebrity hypnotist Ricky Kalmon has amazed audiences around the world. Kalmon empowers his audience with simple but powerful techniques to boost confidence and belief toward their goals and to exceed their own personal and professional expectations. Each episode features business leaders, motivators, and incredible individuals who share how mindset has contributed to their success. Put awareness and action into your life with the confidence that you'll succeed at the things you want to make happen. Here is Ricky Kalmon.
Hi, this is Ricky Kalmon, and welcome to another episode of Amplify Your Mindset. My special guest today is Phil Savage. Phil's earlier career and credits started with being the former general manager for the Cleveland Browns, director of player personnel for the Baltimore Ravens, and player personnel consultant for the Philadelphia Eagles. Phil is an analyst for SiriusXM NFL, ESPNU, ACC, and SEC channels. His book, Fourth and Goal Every Day, Alabama's Relentless Pursuit of Perfection, is now available. You can also listen to Phil in his brand new podcast, Football Philosophy, at theprosclub.com. That's theprosclub.com. After a very successful 6-year tenure as the executive director of the Reese Senior Bowl, Phil was now named as the new general manager of the Phoenix franchise in the new Alliance of American Football, set to begin this February 2019. Phil, welcome to the program.
Good morning, Ricky. Hope you're doing well, and appreciate the time. Good to spend some minutes with you here.
Absolutely. And you know what? That's a short introduction. There's much more. You have done so much in your career. Your career has all been about sports and football. And, you know, I mentioned people, your name, and they're like, oh, I listen to him. Oh, I get great ideas from him. And, you know, his analytics are fantastic. I love Phil. You've got such a great following, great reputation. It's so nice to hear that. And so I'm just excited. We've known each other for a couple of years now, but it's exciting to call you a friend. But I'm glad to have you on the show and share some insight and conversations that you and I've had about mindset.
We're both venturing off into the podcast world too. And you mentioned the Football Philosophy podcast, which we got started a few weeks ago when the football season got started. And as you mentioned, it can be found at the Pros Club Network or theprosclub.com, Apple, Google, and then SoundCloud. So I understand that in this world we're supposed to really try to help each other. So I will definitely mention being on yours over on mine as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, I'm always curious how people get started in their careers. Now, yours goes back to really always, I assume, from just loving football. But if you can give us just a little bit more background that how you got started, what was the passion, and where got the ball rolling?
Well, I'm 53 years old, Ricky, and this is my 47th football season. So I'm one of those kids that went out to the local park in Mobile, Alabama, and put on a uniform and started to play football. And fortunately for me, at a very young age, after one season of playing, I was moved to quarterback. I had an incredible experience with my youth team, the Mims Park Redskins. The coach there was a guy by the name of Bob Gucher. He let us throw the football. We put in a system for 7, 8, 9-year-olds that was very elaborate for that level of the game in terms of the sophistication of the passing portion of it. And that's really what sparked the interest in the game. I played basketball, I played baseball throughout the calendar year. And when people would ask me, what's your favorite sport? It was whatever was in season. And so ultimately got to high school, continued to play football and baseball. And it's sort of a interesting, and I mean, to me, it's a pretty amazing story. I was not a great high school player. My brother was 4 years younger, and he was at a different high school. But the headmaster of his particular high school was a graduate of the University of the South in Sewanee, Tennessee, a Division III liberal arts college. And so the coach from Sewanee had come down to visit that high school to recruit. And the headmaster said, look, I don't think we have anybody over here this year. He said, but one of our students has an older brother down the street at a different high school. You should go over there and check him out. And so the coach from Sewanee came to Murphy High School. He had never been there before. Murphy was a big public high school in Mobile. And so he showed up over there and said, look, if you can play here, you can play for me. And he said, you can play baseball and we'll get you a quality education as well. And honestly, Ricky, that was the only offer, the only legitimate place that raised their hand and said, hey, we'd like Phil Savage to come play for our school. And so it was just one of those things that's sort of meant to be. You know, I'm a believer. I'm a Christian. My dad took me up there. We just kind of felt like everything fell in place for me to go be a part of the Sewanee Tiger athletic program. And so that's what we did. Where I'm going with this is that when I got to Sewanee, one of our assistant coaches was a guy named Dewey Warren, otherwise known as the Swamp Rat. And he's not a familiar name to most football fans, but the Swamp Rat had an all-SEC, semi-all-American career at the University of Tennessee back in the 1960s. Well, ultimately, he had gone into coaching after he had retired from playing around the early 1970s. Well, of all things, he was the coach that installed the passing game offense at Brigham Young University with Lavelle Edwards. And so in the early 70s, they put in that passing attack, and ultimately the Swamp Rat had ended up at Sewanee. He was my coach for 4 years, okay? Wow. We threw the ball all over the lot. And this is in the early 1980s when, you know, teams were still a little bit more of a run-oriented game. I mean, there were a handful of teams that were throwing it, but you know the reputation BYU had. And years later, when I was a scout for the Ravens, I visited BYU and had occasion to speak with Coach Edwards. And I said, hey, do you remember a guy named Dewey Warren? He said, do I remember him? He said, he's the one that got us started in throwing the ball. And that's where my real love for the game and the sport completely took off. At that point, I decided that I wanted to become a coach. And Coach Moore, Coach Horace Moore was our head coach. He and the Swamp Rat were instrumental in helping me get started, where my first job was as a grad assistant at Alabama in 1987. And honestly, that background at Sewanee with the Swamp Rat, and then to get a chance to go from Sewanee to Alabama, I mean, you're talking about two completely different worlds. Absolutely. In the college football game. To go there, that just really set me on a course to be able to have a career in football. And here we are. You blink your eye, and it's 30 years later. Yeah, absolutely. And when you're doing all this, when you were young in this, was there anything else in your mind that, well, if this doesn't work out, I'll do this, or this was it? I mean, this is your passion. Well, my dad and grandfather, they had their own business in Mobile called Gravely of Mobile. It was a lawn and garden equipment tractor company, and my brother and I would work there during the summers. And that was always sort of a safety net. It's like, okay, my father encouraged my brother and I to really pursue what we wanted to do because, you know, he felt like that when his athletic career ended, his dad sort of said, hey, look, you're coming home and going to work for the family business. And, you know, I give my dad 1,000% of the credit for really pushing my brother and I to explore other things. My brother's in the ministry. He's traveled all over the world. As a matter of fact, he's got something called Roads of Hope, and it is essentially a rescue mission for the to prevent children in the Eastern Bloc of Europe, in Moldova and Ukraine, from being put into the sex slave trafficking world, so to speak. I mean, it's the number one place in the entire world where these children are pulled out of these orphanages and put into that lifestyle. And so he's been doing that for about the last decade, in addition to all sorts of things that he's done across the globe. So anyway, long story short, the family business was always a bit of a fallback option, but he encouraged us to go forward and not look back. And like I say, once I got to Swanee, look, you're a 5'10.5", 175-pound quarterback. You don't have a pro career in front of you. And I said, well, I'll try to go into coaching. So that's what I did. I was a coach for 7 years. I was a grad assistant in 2 different schools at Alabama and UCLA for a total of 4 years. And then in 1991, Bill Belichick, who's most famous now for being the head coach of the New England Patriots, he became the head coach of the Cleveland Browns in 1991. And one of my friends at UCLA who was on the staff there had a contact with Bill's, what I call his SIM card, a guy named Ernie Adams, who's been with Bill for all these years.
Sure.
And the coach at UCLA, Bill Reese, recommended me to them. And so I got a job with the Browns on the defensive side of the football. Guess who the defensive coordinator was? A guy by the name of Nick Saban. And so between Alabama, then UCLA, and of course, Homer Smith was the offensive coordinator at Bama and UCLA. He was really my number one football mentor. It was the Swamp Rat, then Homer, and then that opportunity at the Browns. I mean, the training that I got on offense, defense, and special teams at a very young age just really laid the foundation for what has been, you know, a career that certainly hasn't been one that majored in one thing. And so after those 7 years of coaching, Bill actually came to me and said, hey, look, I think you could help us more in personnel. You've got an eye for it. You got a good feel for it. And I think you could really help us. So I switched over to scouting in 1994 and never really returned to the field as a coach. I stayed over on player personnel on that side of the business for the remaining years.
So let me now jump forward a little bit. And as you know, my background is all about just helping people understand that playing field between their ears. And I use sports a lot as an example because you can have an incredible athlete mechanically, physically, but if you don't have the mental side of the game in sync with your body, you know, you're going to falter. And we see it all the time. I mean, you don't even have to be a sports fan to watch athletes who fail because in their mind, they've already convinced themselves that the outcome is going to be failure. How much, in essence, when you were scouting, was mindset an important factor? And what type of things did you look for when you were looking at athletes?
Yeah, Ricky, I think when you're talking about players that are potentially going to become pros, the mentality, the temperament, the character, on and off the field, the competitive nature, those are all buzzwords that the scouts go out and try to assess when they visit these schools, particularly when you're doing the college scouting. And, you know, I always say that college scouting and pro scouting is two different things. In college scouting, you go into a school essentially with a blank piece of paper and you write up the menu to order from. In pro scouting, you know, guys already have somewhat of a career started, and you know the menu's already been written, and you just are ordering off of it to decide, are you going to spend $5 on a burger or $25 on a steak? So I always enjoyed college scouting more, and part of the job in that world is to go onto these college campuses and visit with the coaches and the staff members and the people that are hands-on with these players and try to figure out what you can't see on video, what you can't see in a live practice or a live game, what you're not going to get from the tape. You know, where are the blanks that you can fill in terms of someone's character, mental aptitude, the overall intelligence, the competitiveness, all the things that really are equally as important as the physical ability. Because, Ricky, as we know, when these guys get to the NFL, everyone has huge ability and talent. The separator is the mindset, and it is the devotion to the sport, the devotion to the game, to try to improve, reinvent yourself literally from a week-to-week, certainly if not a year-to-year basis. And so the mentality of finding the guys that really are engaged in the sport and can separate what goes on off the field in their personal lives with what takes place on the field is equally as important too, because as you know, we see a lot of players that come into the NFL that can never get their personal lives in order, and it derails their careers on the field. So the guy that can strike a balance and find a happy medium between being able to manage the money, manage the media, and then, connect with his community, those are the guys that end up having, the decade-long careers in the NFL.
Yeah, you find yourself, correct me if I'm wrong, as a coach, you wear many hats, and this seems to be a very important hat that you have to be attentive to.
There's no doubt about it. And you look at the most successful coaches in the NFL and see one thing people don't understand, the fact that the coaches are around the players a lot less in college football as compared to the NFL. As an example, in college, there's a 20-hour rule in place. So you're talking about essentially a 1 hour worth of meetings and then 2 hours on the field per day. That's not a lot of time. And so the messaging at the college level can oftentimes be repeated multiple times over the course of a season, and obviously from year to year with the transient nature of the college roster turning over every 3 to 4 years with new players. In pro football, it's so much different. It's more of a working relationship between coach and player, because the players are showing up from 8 o'clock in the morning to 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon with meetings, walkthroughs, practices, post-practice rehab, and all those sorts of things. So to me, the pro coach has to be more creative in terms of his messaging and the idea of really trying to create a working partnership with his players, whether it's as an assistant, a coordinator, or as a head coach. So to me, it's more of a challenge at the pro level to really be able to tap in to your players' mindset and have them ready to go each and every week over the course of a 16-game schedule.
How much time do you find that coaches, trainers are spending on that during a day? I mean, because there's practicing, there's hard, training, but what about the mental side? How much time is actually devoted to that?
Typically the head coach will kick off the day, and usually he has, some focus, agenda, priority list in terms of what he's wanting the team to accomplish that day, sort of a theme for the day, if you will, to kind of set the course of what's going to happen over the next 6 or 7 hours. Obviously, nowadays, a lot of the pro teams are employing sports psychologists and the like that are available for players to work through issues that they might be having, whether it's, confidence issues, perhaps something that's going on off the field that could be negatively impacting their play. Usually, that's a situation that is very private and, is not revealed and everybody in the organization doesn't know. But I would say that you have that messaging from the top, Ricky, from the head coach. Then the assistant coaches are going to, mimic and repeat some of that throughout the course of the day. And then most of your best teams will have a veteran leader or two within each position group that will then parrot the same idea. And that's really where the magic happens in pro football. When you can get the messaging from the head coach and the leadership through the players, so it's peer-to-peer, that's where you really separate the best teams from those that are still trying to find their way, at least in my view.
Mm-hmm. In my keynotes, I give this example of watch as a team finishes a game and the winning team is asked, or the quarterback, or whether it's individual or team sport. I find this all the time where during the interview, the first thing the athlete says, they give credit to their mind. We knew we can do it. We just went out there. We put our mind to it today. We didn't let anything get in our way. Yet at the same time, they maybe second or third in the conversation talk about the heartache and the sweat and the hours of training. They give credit to their mind and what we could do, what I can do first. And I find that fascinating. I find that absolutely amazing. And this is nothing new. This has been around. If you look at, the history of sports, listen to athletes after they've achieved an amazing goal. And that's a true testament to, how much goes on between the ears. So my question now is to the coach, you, if you're out there motivating people, if you're out there continually trying to keep the mindset going, who's motivating you? And what do you do to motivate yourself?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that that's one thing that as coaches and or general manager types move up the ladder, you're part of a staff and someone's motivating you. By the time you get sort of to the top of the food chain, if you will, you look around, and that was one of the things that I struggled with as a GM. I did not rely on the peer group, my peers at that level, to call guys and say, hey, how did you handle this? How do you handle this situation? Or, let me encourage you, or have that person encourage me, or say, hey, you guys are doing a great job over there. Keep it going. What a great draft pick, or man, that was an excellent signing, or a good thing you guys, cut or released that one particular player. He became a problem somewhere else. And, there's a reason why there's that phrase out there that it's lonely at the top, because I think as people move up and they end up in that situation, oftentimes they feel like that they are responsible to have all the answers. And that is true to a point. But you're right in terms of trying to, where does that mental training come from? As a believer, I rely on my faith. I have a strong prayer life. I've had that, my entire football career, but, really it goes all the way back to my youth. So some people can find it through their faith. Some people can find it through their family. Other guys can find it through, guys on the team or their coaches or what have you. But in terms of trying to stay ahead of the crowd, so to speak, I think that the best coaches and the best leaders are those that continually try to educate themselves. They try to read about other figures, either in sports or other venues that have had success, because you're right. There is a common thread through a lot of the people that have success, regardless of the vocation. And most of it does start between the ears.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say there's secretly, I think that everybody that we think is successful is still in the back of their mind, okay, what's going to make me more successful? The people that we admire, the ones that motivate us, what are they doing on a regular basis? Do they secretly have a book of somebody else in the side of their bed, or they're reading, what that person did? I mean, you look at, past leaders, influencers, there's got to be, more to everything. And you can't just, you said it's lonely at the top, but, if you stay at that level and realize that you've got to constantly, change the way you think about it. You've got to motivate yourself, or you're going to stay very lonely unless you look for that other inspiration.
Yeah, and one thing I would add to it as well is, you bring up such an interesting point, because when we see the way the media covers sports, unless I'm talking about team sports, not necessarily tennis or golf or what have you. And I mean, we know that those athletes have, they show the U.S. Open over the last few weeks. They show the box, and there's 8 people in that box that are either in they have some sort of role with that one individual player, which is fascinating to me. And golf is kind of a similar proposition. When these guys went on the PGA Tour, you see a team of people around them that are trying to, keep them going from a mental and physical standpoint. And where I was going with this is that I think, again, because I'm talking about from a management and a coaching side standpoint now, as these guys become assistant coaches and then become coordinators and then head coaches, I think that there is a belief that they're supposed to have all the answers. And to me, the best coaches and the best leaders are those that continue to learn and are willing to admit that I don't have all the answers. I need help from other resources and other people that can make me better. And, one of the things that I really discovered about myself when I became the GM of the Browns from 05 to 08 and subsequently was fired at the end of the 08 season is that Ricky, I did all the right things to get to that position, but I didn't do enough to stay in that position, because it's a completely different proposition in terms of what it takes to get there, but then what it takes to stay there. And that's why everyone has such admiration for the people that can have these long careers at the top, either on the field or on the court, or, in the front office or on the sideline, because what those people have discovered is that it's a completely different mentality, and there's a huge difference between getting there and staying there, and that's what people refer to is that it's always easier to get to that first championship. It's more difficult to stay there and win multiple championships, and the same idea is true in our professional lives, whether you're in business or football or whatever the vocation might be.
You couldn't have put a better segue to what I was just about to say. Everything we've been talking about sports relates to our personal and professional life. I truly believe that all the examples that you just gave can resonate with us at home and at work. And my listeners are the business leaders, the CEOs, the presidents, the head of sales, the head of marketing, the people that really, drive and lead a team of people. And no different from a coach. And once you're there, what are you doing to continually create and stay where you are, and how do you get to the next level? I think people are fascinated by that constant pursuit, and that's why I created this show and people like yourself to share, your success and some of the things that you've done in your life. And I thank you for being transparent and sharing with you what you did and what you could have done, and that's very, very humbling of you. And I thank you for sharing that. I'm going to jump right into, because people are fascinated with success, I want to talk a little bit about your book. Let's give a little bit of plug for Fourth and Goal every day. Tell us a little bit about what was your passion to write it, and anything you want to share, and let's put it out there.
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, I found myself in Berea, Ohio in 1991, working with a young head coach named Bill Belichick and a defensive coordinator named Nick Saban, amongst a host of other people.
I've heard of them.
Who have gone on to great football careers. But nevertheless, Nick goes to Michigan State to be the head coach there in 1995. I transitioned over into scouting. We sort of go our separate ways, and I scouted Michigan State when he was there. I scouted LSU when he was there, and then I become the GM of the Browns. He's the head coach of the Dolphins. And then after 2 years in Miami, he comes back to the college game at a place that I started, University of Alabama, where I got a master's degree back in the late 80s. And so, interestingly enough, when I get released from the Browns, the color analyst role on the radio network was open. And so I called the athletic director at Alabama, a man by the name of Mal Moore at the time, and just said, "Hey, Coach, I don't know what y'all are going to do with that spot." I said, "I think I could check off 11 of the 12 boxes, except for maybe the most important one. I didn't play at Alabama. I played at Sewanee." And he chuckled and said, "Yeah, but you started here and you've been here, and you know our coach." And I said, "I tell you another thing, Coach Moore. Nick Saban isn't going to be speaking in Wetumpka or Dothan, Alabama, but I'll go extend the message, because I knew Nick and all." And so anyway, I went there in 2009 to be the color analyst for the Crimson Tide Sports Network. I thought it would be a one-season idea. It ended up being 9 years. And in the midst of it, probably after season 6 or 7, Bama had won 4 national titles in 7 years. And I found myself virtually every game in the booth, looking down at the field and realizing that a lot of what is now known as the process, famously known as the process, was really sort of cultivated, birthed, invented, if you will, experimented with back in those early Browns days from 91 to 95 under Bill Belichick. And so I felt a motivation to tell the rest of the story. Look, this is an historical run that Alabama's on right now, 5 titles in 9 years. This will be an era of football that will be talked about, 40, 50, 80 years from now. And so as I stood there in the booth and was doing the broadcast, I'm like, man, there might only be a handful of people that could write a book from this perspective. As a matter of fact, there's probably only one person that could do that. And so I decided to put pen to paper, so to speak, and Ray Clear is the co-author. Ray did a tremendous job on the book. And so we started at SEC Media Days in July of 16. It took a year plus to put it all together. The book was released in August of 17, so a little over a year ago. The paperback was just released a few weeks ago, a year later. But the title, Fourth and Goal Every Day, came from an experience. I was at the football office in the month of May. This was about 5 or 6 years ago. And Alabama had already won a couple national titles by that time. And I just stopped in to say hello to everybody, check in. I see one of the coaches in the hallway. Now, the month of May is the slowest month of the year for college football. The players are not on campus. The coaches are doing some recruiting, but it's not just this breathless, rat race that they go through the rest of the year. And I see one of the coaches, and I'm like, "Hey, how's it going?" He said, "You know how it is around here. It's fourth and freaking goal every day." And so when he said that, that just told me, that encapsulated what Alabama does. And there's no difference for them, Rick, between May 15th and October 15th. In May 15th, there's a set of requirements in that program that they're going to try to meet, just like there are today as they get ready for their next game, just like there will be in January when they're in the midst of recruiting. Every day is the same. Everyone has a duty, an obligation, a goal to meet with each respective day. And there's a drive there that, look, fourth and goal, you're either going to score or you're going to get stopped. There's no ands, ifs, or buts. And so that's the way they approach literally every minute of every single day in that program.
It's a great book. Thank you, Phil. And those of you listening, go get a copy. Phil Savage's brand new book, Fourth and Goal Every Day, Alabama's Relentless Pursuit of Perfection. And you can listen to Phil's brand new podcast, Football Philosophy, at theprosclub.com. That's theprosclub.com. Phil, thanks again for being on the show today. Good luck with the new season of Alliance of American Football. I look forward to seeing it this February 2019.
You have been listening to Amplify Your Mindset with Ricky Kalmon. For more information on Ricky Kalmon's corporate and personal development programs, visit rickykalmon.com.